So, were you successful? Let's start with exercise 1, creating this sign up form. Now, we're in a form element here already with some bootstrap columns, so what I'll do here is I'll create a div with a class form group to give it some nice bootstrap styling, and in there I want to have a label where I say first name, and then I have my input which is of type text, of course, which shall hold my first name. I will give it a class form control to improve the styling of it. And then I'm going to copy that to also get another forced form group for the last name. And you could style this differently to have them sit next to each other or something like that. I'll keep that really simple. Thereafter, we want to fetch the email address. So that shall be the email address here. And then, let's see, we shall fetch the password next. Now here, of course, we shall change the type to password. I think that makes sense to hide it. And lastly, I want to create these radio buttons. Now, radio buttons with the Bootstrap framework are created like this. We still have our form group here. But then inside this form group, we want to have a label. And in this label, we have our radio button then. So the type is there for radio. And we set a value which is assigned to this radio button. And here this is yes. And of course, we display yes here. So the value in the HTML element is what will be stored thereafter. And yes thereafter is basically just the text we can see in our template. Now, the other radio button belongs to the same form group. So I'll add it like this. And here I want to have no as the value and also as what I see here. So let's see this in the running application. I'm quickly going to spin up my server here again. And this is what I end up with. Looks good. Now with that form created in HTML, the next step is to hook it up to, well, our properties and create these properties in the first place. So let me create these properties quickly. I got an empty object down there. So I'm changing this by using my data here or by setting up my data. And here I want to have a first name, which is empty by default. Thereafter, I want to have a last name, which is empty by default. Then an email, empty by default, and a password, you guessed it, empty by default. And then also my store data field, which I'll set to true initially. Now I can hook them up. So here I want to assign vModel first name to this form group here, for form control I should say. Then for the next it's the last name. And then for this one here it's the email. For the password it's obviously the password property I'm assigning. And then here for this radio button, well, to each of the two radio buttons I assign the store data vModel, because keep in mind we have to assign the same model here to make them alternate, to let Vue.js know that these two radio buttons are alternatives and should be bound to the same property. Now with that I can already output my content here, and I can output the full name here, which simply is my first name and then a white space, and then my last name. It's as easy as this. We could also create a computed property named full name, which kind of concatenates our string here. That would be an alternative. Nice little challenge you could do if you want to. Then down there, I of course want to output the email, and then here the password, of course. And finally here, I want to output the choice regarding the data storage. Now if I save this, and we enter something here, like Max Schwarzmuller, that's my name, choose your name here of course, any email address of your choice, and finally a password. Well, that looks good to me. I think we got a nice working simple form here. Now the next step is that we take this form and enhance it by adding a submit button, and only show the form as long as we haven't submitted it, but once we submit it, show that data sheet here at the bottom. So let's work on this next. To add a submit button to this, I will, surprisingly, first add the button here, submit the form, and I'll set this to type submit. Now I want to add a click listener, of course. And importantly, I add prevent here to prevent the default, which would be, again, to send this form to the server. I don't want that to happen. I don't want this form to reach a server. I want to handle it with Vue.js. So here instead, I choose to do something upon a click, and I could execute a method there, and typically you would probably do this to then use your data in this method. But here, all I need is really just a variable holding a true or false value, which decides if I should show the form or the data. So here I will have my submitted property, which is set to false initially, and I will set this to true here. So submitted equals true now. And the submitted property here decides whether I show this row here, this form. So it's this form I want to show then. So if equals submitted, or I should say not submitted. So if it's not submitted, then we show the form. If it was submitted, well, in this case, I want to show this, and here I use submitted therefore. Now let's see this in action. Looks good. Oh, let's give the button some styling. That looks ugly. So here it gets the button and button primary bootstrap classes here. Just going to restructure that so that everything is on one page here. And now if I save this, looks much better. Let me quickly fill out this form again so that we have some nice values to play around with. And set this to yes again, submit the form, and we see yes here too. Now there was one thing I don't like. The yes field is now pre-selected here. I have to select one. It's empty at the beginning. So let's fix this too. It is of course not pre-selected because I'm storing true or false here in my store data variable. But of course here I have yes and no. So that's a little mistake here. We should of course change this to yes, for example. And now we see it's pre-selected. And I still can submit it, and now I would see no here, since I switched it just a second ago. So with that, we finished the second exercise, added the button. Now let's turn to exercise 3, and maybe put the button here below exercise 2 so that you can clearly see this. And now exercise 3 wants us to basically go up to the fields here, to the first and last name, and put that into a separate component, which we then can use as a form control. So let's do that now. I first will create this component. I will name it full name.view here. And of course I will have a template in there. And I will have a script tag. I won't use any special styling here. Now what I'll do is I will quickly copy the code from there. That will be my template here, of course, the two input fields, though I have to group them in a separate div because we may only have one top level element, if you remember that. And then you hopefully also remember how we set up our own control. We need to be able to get a value passed in, so this value prop, and then to return the input event or emit the input event. Well, therefore I set up props here and I expect to get a value. And then I also need to have a method somehow in my methods array where I can emit an input. Well, let's first work with this value here. The interesting thing is that I have two different inputs here, and I kind of need to split up a value I get passed in into two fields and concatenate any input I have into a field I can output. To do that, I'll first add a computed property. I'll name it first name. This, of course, is a function, as all computed properties are, or a method, I should say. And the goal is to take the first word from my value. Now, that could be complicated if I have, let's say, a name which has three parts, like a middle name in between. That is something we would have to handle differently. I'll keep it simple and assume I only get two parts separated with white space, so empty space. Then, if this is the case, I can simply say the first name is the value. And then I can call the split function and split on the white space. Now, this is an array, and the first element is, of course, the first name. Now, I'm going to copy this to also get my last name here. Just need to copy that, though. And there, I want to get the second element in this array I split. So that should be my last name then. And with that, I can now go to my input here and pass the value to this. And the value here is, of course, my first name. And the value on the second input is, of course, my last name. This is one thing. Now, with that, I'm not emitting my input event though. But let's already see if that works, or if we can at least see that I pass my full name in there. So if I go back to the app.view file, I have to register my component. So I first have to import it, of course. So import full name from that is why I don't get support here, from full name.view, and register it as a local component. Components shall therefore have my app full name, where I have the full name here. I'll also replace first name and last name here and instead only have my full name, and I will provide a default value so that I can see if I correctly passed it down to my component. So here I will populate this with my name. So that's my app full name. I'll add it here, app full name, like this. And I will use vModel to set up or to pass my full name there. I also need to adjust it down there in the string interpolation. I also want to output full name, this new property I just created. Let's have a look. Already looks good. We see it is correctly split up in the component we inserted. That's great. Now the missing piece is to also correctly submit it, so that once I added it here, we see it updated here, which currently doesn't happen. That of course doesn't happen because in my full name component, I'm not emitting events upon changing it. So I need to have listeners on both inputs. I'll listen to add input here and fire name changed. And the same is of course true for my last name here. Now I need a name changed method here then, and I do get the event passed in here. Now the important thing is the name changed event, well, what I have to do depends on which input emits this event, because I know that the event target will be this input element, and this will hold a value which I now need to update in my name. But to do this, I need to know if I need to append it to the first name or prepend it to the last name. So in order to be able to know this, I will pass an argument here where I say first, and here I say last. And of course I also want to pass the default event, which I get passed by the DOM kind of automatically. And here I can now check is first, and therefore let's even make this easier. Let's say true or false. So I check if it is the first name which changed. If it is first name, so if is first is true, then I want to emit an event which is called emit and some data. Well, I want to emit this in all cases, so let's put it outside of this. And instead let's create a variable let name. It's empty at the beginning, and here I will then say name equals, and now it's the first name which changed, so I can say event target value, because that will be the input of my first input element here, event target value. So the first name changed. And now I of course also want to concatenate a white space and then my last name, the computed property, last name here. Otherwise, if it's not the first name, I want to do the same here, but now of course the other way around. So now I do have my first name, which is constant, and then I do add the changed value from the event, which is now referring to the last name input. Now with name set here, I now have to set value equal to name, of course, to update my value property, otherwise my computed properties are not calculated correctly. And then I should be able to output this value here. Let's see if this works as expected. If I reload this page and I change this to Maximilian, submit the form, well, that looks good to me. Now let's also see what happens if I remove the last name. Also looks great. And if I change the last name and the first name, perfect. So the custom control seems to work as it should, and I hope it became clear how to build that control. It always comes down to being able to handle a prop named value and emit an event named input. And with that, I'd say that were great steps in getting deeper into forms and really understanding them.